when I was around 4 years old, I had an experience when I was in my room of a light, a discarnate light, about the size of a basketball in the corner of the room. I'm 4 years old. Hey, what's not to love? And I heard a voice, and I didn't hear the voice through my ears. I heard it on an inner level, and it was so kind, and it was just this invitation. And that really started the whole journey of my life. And that's why, from a very early age, I learned to trust that and to be open to love, even through all the challenges in my life.
As an academic and researcher, I still find myself, when I start to hear you tell your story, don't say that out loud. Because I'm so acculturated.
Yes.
And with a mind of scientism, everything that you're talking about resonates so deeply with me. And I still find it hard to share out loud because of our culture. And I'm glad that Shannon and I are part of maybe a shift where we can speak academically in terms of physics and also share visions of light in a childhood room that changed your perspective on living. And those two things can exist and live together if we allow them to.
When we see the world through these transformed lens of wholeness, we choose differently, we behave differently. And not just on an individual level. When we link up and lift up together, we can co-create and serve transformational change in the world, whether it's economics, finance, business, governance, justice systems, well-being, whatever it is, everything changes. Everything changes for the better.
We just had Valentine's Day, and I've been thinking about love a lot. And I'm asking myself, where am I not allowing love to flow through me?
I would say, as someone who speaks multidimensionally with many different sentience and dead folks and all the rest of it, love doesn't die. Love does not die. And even though there is that challenge, and when somebody that we do love passes, we lose that sort of sense of physical closeness. Yeah, I absolutely honor and respect the grief process of that. And coming through that and realizing that love does not die. And it lives on the more we can trust it. And the more we can trust it, the more we can trust that it can flow through us. We don't have to hang on to it. It flows through us, because how could it not? Because that's who we truly are.
We're here with Dr. Jude Currivan, Oxford physicist and cosmologist, author of 16 books, and we're talking about the tiny little topic of consciousness.
Just for starters. Just for starters.
Yeah. Jude, we want to start with some foundation to kind of ground this conversation. We recently spoke with Alexander Laszlo, who we all know and love, and he described consciousness as a state of the universe and ourselves in it.
Ooh.
Jen and I kind of I kind of talk about it like an interconnectedness.
Yeah.
Jen likes to describe it as a pure being.
Mm-hmm.
Jude, help us understand what the heck is consciousness?
It's a very broad spectrum, I would suggest. And I love what Alexander said and what you just shared, Shannon, as well. I mean, I tend to say that mind and consciousness aren't something we have. They are literally what we and the whole world are. So as a cosmologist and, life of curiosity of the nature of reality, I've come to a perspective that is evidence-based, but it also converges with universal wisdom teachings, that the appearance of our universe, while real, is in its deeper nature, that it arises from what I refer to as universal or cosmic consciousness. And a friend of mine, Max Velmans, differentiates mind and consciousness, which is why I do say mind and consciousness aren't, because many of the universal wisdom teachings talk about cosmic mind. That's how Einstein referred to it. And others talk about the ground of all being, an eternal and infinite cosmic mind from which our universe arises like a great thought rather than a great thing. And we're part of that thought. So when Alexander talks about it being a state of our universe, I would say it is the universe. It is the universe, the emergent universe arising from these deeper realms of causation in this incredible adventure that we're all part of. And we are microcosmic co-creators of its innate consciousness, sentience. I hope that helps.
It certainly does. And when you talk about mind and consciousness, it brings me to a conversation we had with Nick Walker, a somatic psychologist, and he talks about the mind and body as one. He
Yes.
calls it the body mind.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, where does the body fall into that, right? Because if we're talking about mind and consciousness,
Yeah.
what does that mean?
Well, I go back to another friend of mine, Elizabeth Sartoris. And Elizabeth had a wonderful analogy of a piano keyboard. And that a piano keyboard represents the entirety of that spectrum of consciousness. And the lower keys of the keyboard are our physicality, the way our consciousness is embodied within our physical nature. As we go up the piano keyboard, we get to emotional and mental states. And then at the top end of the keyboard is discarnate states of awareness. But she said, and I would agree with her, they're not separate. They're part of a spectrum of awareness coming from that very somatic physicality, which is all part of this larger understanding of who we really are. And, she always used to laugh because she used to say, the mainstream scientist would be on the lower keyboards going, oh, that's nonsense. No alerts. That's nonsense. And you have these very spiritual gurus at the top end going, physicality. Oh, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. She said, and I agree with her, all of it matters. It's all part of who we really are and what we're all part of.
That takes me to a topic that we didn't intend to talk about, but I love it when I hear you talk about it. And I know our audience will too, is that what you just mentioned there is the separation of science and spirituality, or science and universal wisdom.
Yeah.
And why is that? Like, we want to get to this place where we don't think of that as such a separation. Why can't those things live together?
Well, first of all, let me just take a step back because that's such an important question, Jan. Just take a step back around this, what you were saying earlier about mind and body and spirit. That in itself suggests a separation. Mind, body, spirit. And what Elizabeth and I and many others are realizing and saying is, no, it's all part of the wholeness of who we really are, what the universe really is, and ultimately as a great mindful, conscious thought form in an infinite and eternal cosmos. So just grounded it in that perspective, why did science and spirituality sort of, I don't know, go this way? Well, science, the whole investigation that we now call science, really began in the 16th century with a schism. And it began with a schism because back then, what weren't called scientists, they were called natural philosophers, such as Galileo and Kepler and Newton and others, were, the church authorities in Western Europe said, yeah, go and investigate the natural world, even though at that point, until that point, there'd been very little authentic investigation. There was a lot of superstition. In the medieval world, it was all about superstition. And the church authorities really were benevolent in many cases to say to the natural philosophers, go and investigate the physical world, the natural world, but do not cross the red line and try and investigate anything to do with metaphysics or spirituality or religion. Okay? And the scientific method, as it was derived by Francis Bacon, was really powerful because it said to get beyond superstition, you really needed to experiment. You needed to observe, and you needed to have observations and experiments that were able to be replicated. Okay? That was really powerful. And then that started to open the door. And then very soon, one of the French philosophers, René Descartes, said basically he explained the universe as a mechanism, And so by the time that other natural philosophers came along, such as Newton, and Newton showed that you could see complex phenomena, that when you looked down beneath their complexity, they were simple and they obeyed universal laws. So you have this powerful method of exploration allied to a view that the universe was a great mechanism, view to underneath its complexity, all its cogs, was a simple laws. And that really then was the journey. That was the direction of travel for science going forward, because more and more it was able to describe the physical world, but it did so in a particular way. It did so by taking apart these complex things, this complex phenomena, and reducing them to their smaller constituents. Now that's really powerful. But what it does is it loses the whole when you take it down to the constituents. It's like taking apart one of our bodies and taking it apart to the cells and then taking it back to the atoms. What you lose in that is all of the interrelationships, the interdependencies, the processes, the community that is a living body. So reductionism, focused purely on physical phenomena, by the 19th century had reduced the world to this mechanistic cogs. But it was so powerful, guess what? Its discoveries and its technologies drove the Industrial Revolution. And by that, it wasn't just science and technology. It was how we educated our children to enable that they grew up to be cogs in the machine. How we looked at healthcare, keeping people healthy enough to become and be cogs in the machine. How we governed and how we organized our structures, hierarchical, like cogs in a machine. So that's been what we've had until now. And that's meant that we've seen the world and each other as separate. And it's why, therefore, our structures and our processes and our behaviors see the world through that lens of separation. And so, in my view, we have a dis-ease of separation. And what is so wonderful now is that the evidence is turning that on its head. But it's been so powerful for so long. And yet it is the antithesis, it's the opposite of what science is now discovering. And of course, it's the antithesis of what universal wisdom teachings and indigenous traditions have shown us for so long. So now science is coming full back. It's coming back, but it's doing so in a way that there's nobody saying you can't show that, you can't go where the evidence leads. It's coming back to a point where it's converging with universal wisdom teachings to reveal that, you know, unity isn't an aspiration. It's our existential reality. This is who we really are. And we're remembering. So I would suggest that the homecoming.
I was thinking about this idea of wholeness and, mind, body, spirit being one, and how that affects people. One of our colleagues, Dr. Miles Spar, talked to us about this idea of oneness, right? The idea that we are one with the universe. We are whole beings, mind, body, and spirit. And he says when someone really embodies that and understands what that means, it's actually more important for your health than the blood pressure and the respiratory rate and the EKG, right? He's saying that idea of oneness, that idea of wholeness is fundamental to our well-being, right? What do you think about that?
I wholeheartedly agree. and because you can't, where do you stop wholeness? It doesn't stop at our skins. It doesn't stop at our friends and family. It doesn't even stop at our planetary home, Gaia. It doesn't even stop at our solar system or our galaxy. It stretches out to the whole universe. And yet that vastness of our universe, because I talk about, our universe beginning nearly 14 billion years ago as a cosmologist, not as a big bang. We know it wasn't big. That's just a bit of a joke. But it wasn't a bang. It was incredibly fine-tuned, beautifully related and fine-tuned, and so able not just to meaningfully exist, but to purposely evolve from simplicity to complexity. So I talk about it being the first moment of an ongoing big breath. So isn't it wonderful if we can have that real analogy? It really is more than just a sort of a nice idea. This is how our universe began, and as space has expanded and space and time's flowed forward, has continued that big breath. But that big breath breathes through us in every moment. The beautiful atmosphere, our planetary home. As the trees breathe out oxygen, we breathe it in. It's our little breaths are intimately conjoined with the big breath of our entire universe. That is wholeness.
You've mentioned before, and I haven't stopped thinking about this fractal nature of the world that we live in. And as you're mentioning these things, it reminds me to bring this to a human level, of community.
Yeah.
Right? Like this interconnectedness, of course, for myself and the world and the trees and my breath, and also our human communities that we have to exist within, and how even that has changed. And hopefully we're making a shift to recognize the importance of community. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's vital, Jen, because, when I talk about when we talk about wholeness of the universe, the wholeness of our universe is played out in interdependent relationships at every scale. If you think about it, from electrons and neutrons and protons in an atom to the evolution of stars and all the elements and galaxies and planetary homes and biological organizations, to us, our bodies, our individual bodies is a community of between 30 and 50 trillion cells. And most of them aren't human, by the way.
That is wild in and of itself. Like, humanity isn't even
There's a lot of fungi, there are a lot of viruses, and a lot of bacteria that, help to form the community of our bodies. And if our bodies aren't in right relationship with all of those, we're not healthy. And so when we take that out to that next fractal level, as it were, of family and friends and communities, if we're not in what indigenous wisdom talks about right relationship, which is about balance and reciprocity, kindness, compassion, sharing. If we're not in right relationship, that is not in alignment with universal principles. Because I would argue that love is not just a human feeling. It is a principle of the universe. And it's an evolutionary principle of our entire universe. So when we talk about communities, yes, absolutely. Within ourselves, between ourselves, and onward and onward. That's what the fractals do, of course, because they scale up and scale down. At all scales, we've seen fractal patterns at the scales of clusters of atoms, all the way through to planetary systems, to our solar system, to our galaxy, to cluster galaxies, to fractal patterns that fill the ancient radiation that fills the whole of space. So these patterns and fractal patterns are innately relational. That's the point. They don't exist. They have to exist in relationship, and those relationships scale up and scale down.
John Vervaeke says meaning making happens in that relational space, right? It doesn't happen within me. It doesn't happen within you. It happens when we come together and create something new.
Exactly so. And when I talk about, meaningful information, digitized information, but meaningful, that is meaningful from the scale of the most minute scale of our universe, which is as small as to an atom, as the atom is to the whole universe, it's called the Planck scale, that's when the appearance of our universe is made manifest. And so that meaning making, whether we're here or not, our universe is innately meaningful
Mm.
and purposeful, whether we're here or not. And it's been on this journey for nearly 14 billion years and ongoing.
And it puts us right smack dab in this very tumultuous period of time that
Yeah.
we're living in.
Yeah.
You know, we talked a lot about this, and we also talked to Ginny Whitelaw from the Institute of Zen Leadership, and we talked to her about islands of coherence.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Jen and I are really focusing on with this podcast, of course, called Connected, is to kind of connect these islands of coherence, right? Because she referred to Ilya Prigoggin's work.
That's right.
And spoke about how, this isn't a metaphor. This is a real thing, folks.
Yeah.
Right. So if we can build community and pull in these islands of coherence, right? What does that mean for our future if we can do that?
Well, first of all, I think the tumult of these times is the end part. It is the end game of this journey of separation. And, the trauma that we've held with it, the ways we behaved through it has brought us to this point. And this point is truly extraordinary. And I say unique. We've never been here before. And if we're going to survive and thrive as a species, we can't go on as we have been. And I'm not going to go in the blame game. And we talked a little bit about the scientific method, which has been incredibly powerful, but it's only been able to partially help us understand the nature of the world that we're part of. And it's actually lost a lot in the sense that I think it's dislocated our psyche in the process. So now we're beginning to wake up, we're beginning to remember, and we're also having the evidence that shows us that we can turn that old paradigm of a mechanistic and solely material and world and worldview separation on its head. We can come into wholeness. We can realize that unity is our existential reality. It's not a hope for or an aspiration. So all of that, what that means is, in so many ways, is that we are waking up and we're finding each other. And we're finding each other. And as we do so, communities, I'd say islands, but communities, going back to Jen, your point, communities of coherence are forming. And it really is one of the metaphors but it's more than a metaphor again, that I'm working with, which is to reframe what we often call our metacrisis as a potential metamorphosis. Because in a metamorphosis, when the caterpillar, having eaten all it can, can't eat anymore, goes into its cocoon, its body dissolves, its old body dissolves into this nutrient soup. And from that nutrient soup, what's called imaginal cells of the potential butterfly start to form. Now, those imaginal cells, Jen, are effectively islands of coherence, because what they are is they're cohering the potential for the butterfly to come. And then they start to link up together, to connect together in clusters, imaginal clusters. So those islands of coherence, those communities of coherence become bigger. And then they start to join up even more, and they become the legs of the butterfly, the wings of the butterfly, crucially, and the new body of the butterfly, but crucially, they form the new eyes of the butterfly. So whereas the caterpillar's eyes tend to be really simple, they're enough to find food, yeah, but not a lot more. They don't differentiate. They're very simple. The eyes of the butterfly to be are complex. They see the world in a myriad of color, much more nuanced, much more rich and abundant in possibility. So by the time the butterfly comes out of the cocoon and is ready to fly, the butterfly literally sees the world with new eyes. Now, if we're in a metamorphosis, we've come into it as caterpillars. Are we going to emerge from it as butterflies?
there's tremendous opportunity right now, right? Like if we can grab a hold of that, there is something that we can do with it that's better than what we're faced with right now.
Totally.
And I wonder, we're talking about community and kind of waking up and finding each other. I mean, it's like Jen and I, right? We woke up, and we found each other, and we're able to now create this beautiful thing. Jen and I working together, we formed kind of a shared narrative, right? About how we talk about these things.
Yeah.
And Jen and I, as communicators, one of our goals of the podcast is to kind of develop that shared narrative.
Yeah.
So if you were giving us advice, right, how do we tell this story to ourselves and each other to kind of link together these islands of coherence?
Oh, that's good, Shannon.
Yes, it is. It's vital. And I'm working with many communicators who are feeling this call. How do we share this new narrative? It's a new narrative because it's also includes now scientific evidence, and it's an ancient narrative. It's an ancient narrative of deep wisdom and universal wisdom teachings. And it's a narrative that is about wholeness and community and relationship. Whether that's, ancient wisdom from ancient Greece or Egypt or China or India or indigenous traditions. And it's a narrative that is founded on a worldview of wholeness. Yeah, because the worldview essentially is like the bedrock. Yeah. The narrative then is, how do we communicate our worldview? And then, if you like, the stories are actually the beautiful froth on top of the narrative.
Right.
And a shared narrative is that conceptual, that community of the same, the same way of looking at the world and sharing our understanding of it. And then it comes into what I call many voices, one heart. It becomes into many different voices to share stories, to welcome stories. And when we do that, it seems to me that that's where the healing can also be, because that journey of separation has meant that we have seen each other as other, And now, as we start to understand that we can stand on the bedrock of unity and diversity, that bedrock is also unity and belonging. Everyone belongs. We all belong. We're all microcosmic co-creators. We're all citizens of this vast, wonderful, whole universe. And so, everything from how I'm sharing the story of the whole journey of our universe to tiny little stories about, I have to tell, I wrote about slime molds when I wrote the story of Gaia, and I fell in love with slime molds.
Somebody's got to love slime molds, Jude.
Well, you
Thank
should.
God.
God, we all should.
We do
And
now.
there is a good reason for this, because one of the lenses by which we see the world in separation is that we're so smart. We are so smart, and somehow we are apart from nature. And we're now remembering, thank goodness, what the indigenous wisdom's always told us. We are a part of nature. But also, when you when you start to look at slime mold, let me tell you the story. The researchers discovered that if you took a slime mold from the forest, probably not very happy about that, by the way, because if I was a slime mold, I'd want to stay in the forest. Take the slime mold and put it in a laboratory on a flat plate. And then just put around the plate some oat flakes, which apparently slime molds love. If they're not in the forest, they'll do with oat flakes in the laboratory. So these researchers put a slime mold on a plate and they put oat flakes around it. And they looked at the speed in which a slime mold was able to find the oat flakes. Now, a slime mold doesn't have a brain. A slime mold doesn't have a nervous system. Okay. A slime mold is actually, the particular types that are studied, is single-celled, and it found those oat flakes. Now, the interesting thing is that they didn't put the oat flakes randomly on the plate. They put them to replicate the the transit system, the metro transit system in Tokyo, which is incredibly complex. And engineers had spent years trying to develop the transit system in Tokyo with these big computers, trying to get the optimum. So the trains ran optimally and the routes. Well, the slime mold managed to do this in a couple of hours.
Of course.
Wow.
So that's why I
Wild.
fell in love with slime. I mean, nature, the natural world, but we're part of it. The universe is incredibly intelligent, as well as being sentient and living and loving. So there is innate intelligence at all scales. And us remembering that and telling stories about that, and realizing that. And we realize that, trees care about other trees. Forests have mother trees. They look after each other. They care about each other. If there's something not great coming their way, they warn each other. Can we live like this? Can we remember this? Can we have the empathy and the compassion and the love, not just for ourselves and our close friends and family, but for our entire human family and our planetary family, and realize that we truly are a part of this wondrous universe of ours?
Well, I believe that's possible.
I
I
do too.
believe
I
I
do too.
really do. And it's part of the mission again on our podcast.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about love and how, the universe, one could say, or maybe you would disagree, that love is kind of foundational. The universe is love, right? Alexander says love is the only dynamic within consciousness that carries its own movement, which is kind of interesting. So, because there's that yearning, there's that desire, right, to love more, that kind of carries you forward. So this got me thinking, and I wanted to know what you thought about this. So I used to think of love like as an emotion.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of it more now as an actual cosmological force,
Mhm.
right? So, how can we tap into that when it doesn't always feel that love is the fundamental part, the fundamental string that's tying this all together, especially in the times that we live?
It's so important. First of all, yes, I would agree. Love is foundational. And I would also suggest that it is an evolutionary force, because it's innately relational, and evolution journeys from simplicity to ever greater levels of relatedness and complex relatedness. Yeah. So in that regard, atoms nearly 14 billion years ago only had to love each other. But after hundreds of millions of years, and stars and galaxies and planetary homes and plants and people and all between and all still, that foundational nature of love has explored itself and experienced itself at ever greater levels of community, at ever greater levels of complexity. And of course, when you get community and complexity and relationships, you also get misunderstandings. You also get things that aren't necessarily coherent. And when you've also come part of a journey that you've forgotten that you're inseparable, then it's easy to have love showing up in dysfunctional ways. Yeah. And so I'm working with colleagues on something called the science of unitive love, or soul, because love, again, is that spectrum. We can have a very codependent relationship that we call love. We can have, English is not great in certain ways. It's a marvelous language in other ways, but we only have one word for love. Other languages have many words for love, from friendship to erotic love to divine love, agape in Greece. I mean, if we look at the Greek language, they loved love. They really loved talking about love and philosophizing about love and recognizing that it shows up in different ways along a spectrum, from very, very personal and sometimes quite functional, through to the wholeness of being, the interbeingness of love. And so that's the love I'm talking about when I talk about the universality of it, this foundational and evolutionary force that it is. And yet, even whatever way we are on that spectrum, when we open to love, I think the universe invites us to go deeper into it. You know, it moves through, and friendship deepens relationship, deepens a sense of love for our planetary home. You know, all the time the universe is offering us and inviting us, it seems to me, to go deeper in the exploration of what love truly is, if we're open to it. And sometimes we get hurt by love and we want to retreat from love. And I did that when I was a young person. You know, I lost people around me. All the, and I hid away from love for quite a long time. I went into my head. I sort of put a sort of nice sort of a container around my heart, thinking it was going to help me be safe. And all it did was imprison me. And it was only when I realized that and life managed to break open that container that I truly opened myself to what love can truly be, can really be. And that's been the most extraordinary, wonderful journey ever since. So I would just invite, you know, with all the challenges, to say yes to love.
Always
So
say yes to love.
First, Shannon and I are forever saying that language is failing us. We need so many more words, especially more words in English for love. That would be a really good place to start, for sure. I have two questions left for you. One is, I wonder if you can expand a little bit more on this phrase you used, unity in diversity.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about unity, and this is importance of unity, but I think sometimes for myself, when I first started understanding this, I would think that meant similarity and sameness. But how can we have unity and also have such diversity? Why don't we have to be the same? And can we be unified if we're different?
Well, put it this way, I always follow what the universe guides. And having been on this journey of sort of exploration, curiosity since I was 4 years old, I've always been in wonder at the way in which, and I've always experienced our universe as its wholeness. I've always wondered at that level of diversity. And I come to the view that to learn about it, the universe is just curious about itself. And you're right, unity is not uniformity. It's not homogeneity. And if it was, how boring would that be? How would we learn? How would we learn on a human level from each other? You know, there are 8+ billion people walking our beloved planetary home. Everyone is unique. But it's not just us. It's every leaf on every tree, every snowflake. You know, when we get down to the scale of atoms and subatomic particles, yes, they're the same. But when you start to move up and you start to move into elements, chemical elements, yeah, they're the same. But then their relationships mean that the diversity can really start to grow. You know, that journey from simplicity to complexity is innately a journey into diversity as well as. And that means that the relationships become more richer and deeper and varied. So unity is differentiated, but is not separated. We are each unique and yet inseparable from the whole. And I think understanding that and realizing that when we do expand our awareness, our consciousness, you were saying earlier, Shannon, into that wholeness, certainly my experience, and it's been the experience of everybody, literally everybody that I've ever spoken to that is conscious of this journey or aware of this journey, does appreciate that it brings them deeper and deeper into their authentic uniqueness, where they can celebrate that diversity within themselves and appreciate it within others and the world at large. So it's so important. And that's when I spoke about many voices, one heart, as all the stories, because then there's such joy in my experience of hearing different stories, different perspectives, and going, oh, that's different. Ah, and that's the same.
Mm-hmm.
And really enjoying that both and of differentiate, sameness differentiated and unique expression of it.
So if you value learning, if you value a richness in your life, then unity and diversity is what you're after.
And I'd go a step beyond it. Yeah, unity and diversity and inclusion and belonging. And belonging. Yeah.
Unity in diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a new name for the podcast now, Shannon.
I love it. I love it. We just had Valentine's Day, and I've been thinking about love a lot. And I was trying to think of it a little differently this year. And I'm asking myself, where am I not allowing love to flow through me?
Yeah.
Right? Because in community, in relation, right, the love is there.
Yeah.
We have to be willing and accepting of it.
Yeah.
It's definitely a different way of looking at love. How do we get to a point where we can open ourselves up to all of the love that's already available?
It's a wonderful, vital question. I would also say, in my experience, there isn't a single answer. I think the number of things, first of all, you said something really important. You talked about love flowing through you. You didn't talk about hanging on to love. You talked about love flowing through you. I think that is so important, because it's when we think somehow that love is a scarce commodity, and we hang on to it, or we're in love with someone, or we love someone and we don't want to lose them. I would say, as someone who speaks multidimensionally with many different sentience and dead folks and all the rest of it, love doesn't die. Love does not die. And even though there is that challenge, and when somebody that we do love passes, we lose that sort of sense of physical closeness. Yeah. And that I absolutely understand, and I absolutely honor and respect the grief process of that. Coming through that and realizing that love does not die. Love lives on is one point. And it lives on the more we can trust it. And the more we can trust it, the more we can trust that it can flow through us. We don't have to hang on to it. It flows through us, because how could it not? Because that's who we truly are in that sense. So to answer your question about how can we come to this understanding, I think start with where you are. Start with where you are. And, what do you love? Who do you love? But what do you love? I love dancing around the kitchen table to ABBA, personally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Mhm.
also love being a gardener and growing in my garden and planting a seed and nurturing and seeing it grow and being so grateful. And for me, there's almost like a trinity of love, joy, and gratitude. Somehow, when we're grateful, that opens the door to love. Somehow, when we're joyful, that opens the door to love. And when we love, that opens the door to joy and gratitude. So it's like they dance together. So whichever way in. So I invite, folks to be grateful, because that will open the door, to find joy in their lives, because that will open the door. And then just keep that door open.
Yes. As we were talking, I want to back up a second, because I remembered this when we talked in California. You had an experience when you were very young, right? And if you're comfortable talking about that, I would love to kind of bring that to our audience. If I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, I did. And it's one I've told quite a lot, but it's just the first step of a lifelong journey of curiosity and exploration and experience. And I was, I grew up, as you might remember, as the daughter and granddaughter of coal miners in the north of England. So absolutely couldn't get more grounded in the community.
Mhm.
And when I was around 4 years old, I had an experience when I was in my room of a light, a discarnate light, about the size of a basketball in the corner of the room. I'm 4 years old. Hey, what's not to love? And I heard a voice, and I didn't hear the voice through my ears. I heard it on an inner level. And it was so kind. And it was just this invitation. And that really started the whole journey of my life in that regard. Because I realized that the physical realm was just part of a much greater, mindful, conscious, multidimensional, whole universe. And I was up for exploring it. And I was curious about it. And I have been ever since. And that journey, being open, I talk about the door opening, being open to that, what I've seen as an invitation of the universe on this adventure, has meant that I've had the most extraordinary experience and learned from great wisdom keepers, some living, many discarnate, different levels of wisdom. So for me, the indigenous traditions and the universal wisdom traditions that talked about all of this I think they probably saved my sanity when I was a young person, because what I was taught at school was, of course, the paradigm, materiality, mechanism, separation. But it was these wisdom teachings and indigenous traditions that said, no, we all are part of this web of life, of sentience, of a living and loving universe. And that's why, from a very early age, I learned to trust that and to be open to love, even through all the challenges in my life. And when I did at one point close myself down because it was really tough. And, those years I'll never get back in my life. But when I did get them, when I did open my heart or have it opened again, it was like being reborn in my heart, reborn into love again. Because the rest of the journey went on, the explorations, the curiosity and all the rest of it. But that was the day I was born again.
It's interesting because the wisdom traditions knew this all along,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Kind of awakening to the possibilities that have already been there,
Yeah, but
for
what is so
forever.
great? Yeah, and what's so great, Shannon, with the internet, with all the access we have, we have access to those universal wisdom teachings across the world. We have access to indigenous traditions and wisdom keepers, and we now have the evidence of science at all scales and across many different fields of research that is converging and sharing the same perspective. That convergence of science and consciousness and spirituality is coming together just when we perhaps have never needed it more.
And to hear this story, Jude, thank you for sharing. But
Thank you.
as an academic and researcher myself, I still find myself when I start to hear you tell your story, don't say that out loud, because I'm so acculturated
Yes.
and with a mind of scientism
Yeah.
that I haven't, and I deeply believe internally from my own personal beliefs, everything that you're talking about resonates so deeply with me. And I still find it hard to share out loud because of our culture. And I'm glad that Shannon and I are part of maybe a shift where
Yeah.
we can speak academically in terms of physics
Yeah.
and also share visions of light in a childhood room that changed your perspective on living. And those two things can exist and live together if we allow them to.
Absolutely. And I think this is going back to what we were saying earlier about the new narrative, because it's a both and. I've always been a both and girl. Whenever there's been an either or, I've always thought, what am I missing? What am I missing? So the both and is both of this. It's the inner and the outer. It's the being and the doing. I love, science, and I love both. I love the processes, the rigor of science. But I would also say that many scientists, because they've been trained with a worldview of separation of materiality, And because the institutions that have trained them have embedded that perspective, the evidence has not been followed wherever it leads, which is, for me, one of the things I'm so grateful for is when I was doing my physics masters at Oxford University, a wonderful gentleman, a wonderful man called Dennis Sharma became my mentor. And Dennis had been Stephen Hawking's PhD supervisor at Cambridge. And then Dennis came to Oxford and took me under his wing, really. And he knew I was too much of a maverick to be an academic scientist. But what he said is, Jude, whatever you do, follow the evidence wherever it leads. And that I've always sought to do. So now, full spiral, full cycle, the books I write, the academic articles that I write is the evidence. And I don't, in those, academic articles necessarily use the word spirituality. I'll use that in other environments. But I'm not afraid of using it. I'm just trying to get to what you were saying earlier about what is the best language where we can meet people, perhaps not where they're at, but a step beyond where they're at. So they can see that if we invite them, they could have the courage in themselves and the openness within themselves to say yes and take that and say yes to that invitation and take that step that's not so far that it's an abyss, but it's not staying where they are.
Just
The
a
language, a little step, and to use the language that, invites them rather than puts people off. So for some people, spirituality is that invitation. For some, it's not. For some, consciousness is that invitation. For some, it's not. For some, it's, would you like to dance with me around the kitchen table to ABBA?
I'm in, Jude. I am in. It's very beautiful. And together I see us creating this story right now, right? The language, the stories that are needed to kind of bring people together. So that is amazing.
Jude, do you have a tool or practice that you might be willing to share with us and our audience that grounds you in this practice and keeps you in a state of well-being?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I would reframe it as, I don't have a practice, I am a practice. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So my life is, if you want to describe it, a living meditation, but with all the chocolate biscuits and the red wine that go along with that. So what I've found over the years is for me, sitting quietly on a yoga mat doesn't do it, but being out in the garden does, or with the trees it does, or singing it does, or dancing it does, or whatever. So I would say that, going back to each of our uniqueness, what is it that makes each of our hearts sing? Because that is the practice, to be that, to embody that, not to say, oh, I can't do this today, I'm too busy, and I'll be happy in a week's time, or I'll find something joyful on Sunday. No, it's bringing joy and love and gratitude into our lives so that we are love, joy, and gratitude. So we are that practice.
That is so beautiful. Framed perfectly, that I totally understand. We are the practice every day, every minute.
Exactly.
We are the practice, and we get to choose what we practice.
Very welcome.
And we're going to wind up this conversation with a word or phrase or some sort of takeaway. So all three of us are going to answer. Is anyone ready to go?
Love is a principle of the universe. Love is a principle of the universe. And if I can shift my mindset to believing that, then I just can only imagine what could unfold.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with when we talked about mind, body, and spirit, that wholeness. I'm always striving to be a whole person, standing in my own authenticity, right?
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Both of you. Beautiful. And I'll just repeat. I found that the dance of love and joy and gratitude just plays and opens the doors and invites us on this ongoing journey of adventure and exploration and becoming. So love, joy, and gratitude, whichever way, but every day. We choose differently. We behave differently. And not just on an individual level. When we link up and lift up together, we can co-create and serve transformational change in the world, whether it's economics and finance, business, governance, justice systems, well-being, whatever it is, everything changes. Everything changes for the better.
What a beautiful way to end. Thank you, Jude, for this conversation. It has been expansive yet grounded, and everything and more that Jen and I were looking to discuss with you. So thank you so incredibly much for coming on Connected with Jen and Shannon. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to hit like and subscribe and follow us on socials.
It helps us build a space where we can all learn and grow together.